Hello, welcome. This video is going to discuss quotation marks, and there are a lot of rules on quotation marks. So what I've decided to do, rather than overwhelm you with one long video, I have divided the video into two parts, and I hope you'll find it easy to follow, and I'll go over rules and give you a lot of examples to clarify the rules. So let's start working on this together. Quotation marks, and I've shown you how you form quotation marks. They are used to set off direct speech, some titles, and also to set off short passages of quoted material. Now you must be sure that you open your quote as well as close all quoted material. And that's why I've shown you here the two quotes. You always have to open and then you must close. You can't just have one quote. In other words, quotation marks always come in pairs, always in pairs. Remember that all the words that come inside the two quotation marks, they have to be the exact words and only the exact words of the speaker. Okay? If you're going to add any other words in, there are other rules for that, but keep in mind that any time you use these quotation marks, they have to be the exact wording of a speaker. So when do we use quotation marks? Let's review the uses of quotation marks. The first one is to set off titles of short works. Now what that means is you use quotation marks to enclose the titles of short works, such as chapters of books, the names of short stories, the names of poems, the names of songs, essays, and if you're quoting an article in a magazine, an article in a newspaper, or an article in a journal, that's when you would use quotation marks. Now sometimes you underline. And how do you know when you underline? Well, you would always underline the titles of books, the titles of newspapers, movies, plays, the title of a magazine, a record album, a CD title, an opera, a film, and a TV show. Whenever you're referring to those in your writing, you must underline them. Now, let's look at examples, and the more you use these, you'll familiarize yourself with the differences between those pieces of work that you would use quotation marks with and those you would underline. So let's look at the first example. We have to read the chapter 10 Uses of the Comma in our grammar textbook, Essentials of Grammar, before our next English class. Now if you look at this, the name of the chapter is 10 Uses of the Comma. So because that's the name of the chapter, you put quotation marks around the name of the chapter. But the textbook name, the name of the grammar textbook, is Essentials of Grammar. So you have to underline the name of the title of the book. And that's explained right up here, that you use quotation marks around shorter pieces like a chapter, but you underline the title of a book, and that's the title of a book. The second example, John Lennon's song Give Peace a Chance remains popular even today. You always put songs in quotation marks because it's a shorter piece of work. It's only the longer pieces that you underline. So there's the name of the song, the quote, and then you close the quotation mark because they come in pairs. 3, two of my favorite childhood books were Tom Sawyer and Little Women. Those are the names of books again, so you underline books. So I've underlined for you Tom Sawyer and Little Women. The fourth one, I went to see the musical Dirty Dancing more than 3 times because of the great music and the incredible dancing. The musical, so you're referring to the play, whether it was the play or the movie Dirty Dancing. We mentioned right here that the names of plays and the names of movies you always underline. So that's why Dirty Dancing was underlined. And the fifth example, have you read John Keats' famous poem To Autumn in the poetry book? In the book called The Poetry Collection of Keats, and in fact there should be a question mark. It's a question, you're asking a question. So this is the name of the poem, and the poem is a shorter piece that's inside a book, a poetry anthology. So to differentiate the name of the poem, and we mention here the names of poems, here's poems, you use quotation marks. So it's a shorter piece, so the name of the poem you would put in quotation marks. But it comes from the book, so to show that it comes from the book, you underline the name of the book. So in other words, the shorter piece you use quotation marks, the longer piece to differentiate you would underline. So here's a chart with some examples to help you. When do you use quotation marks and when do you underline? Okay, the first one, an article, online dating today, and it comes from the magazine called Time. So if you look at this, the name of the article is in quotes, but the name of the magazine that it comes from is underlined, the title, to differentiate between the name of the article. If you underlined it all, you wouldn't realize what was the name of the article and what was the name of the magazine. Or the second example, over here, the chapter, The Money Market in the book Essentials of Economics. This is the name of the chapter, so it goes in quotes, but it comes from the book Essentials of Economics. So now you know when you look at the quotation marks that that's a shorter piece, the name of the chapter, and now you know that as soon as it's underlined, that must be the title of the book. The poem The Road Less Taken in the book A Collection of Frost Poetry, the shorter piece, which is the poem, goes in quotation marks, but the name of the book, The Anthology of Poetry, is underlined, A Collection of Frost Poetry. John Lennon's song Woman in the CD album Double Fantasy, while the name of the album or the CD is underlined, because that's the main body of work, and then the song, each individual song in that album or CD, you'd put in quotes because each one is a smaller piece within the longer one. And the short story The Dead in the book The Dubliners, well, the name of the short story is the shorter piece, so you use the quotes, open and close them, but it comes from the book called The Dubliners, which is the longer piece of writing, so you would underline. And then the last example is the television show The Wheel of Fortune. All TV shows, all movies, you underline the title. So in printed form, the titles of long works are italicized. So if you're, typing it, you could use italics. You wouldn't underline. You obviously can't use italics when you are handwriting, but you can if you're typing it. So in this sentence, I love the movie Romeo and Juliet. If you were typing it, you could put it in italics. So you'd say, I love the movie Romeo and Juliet. Or you could also underline, I love the movie Romeo and Juliet, and underline. And in this next example, the article Obesity in Youth in Today's Parent is very informative to all parents. The name of the article goes in quotes because it's the shorter piece, and it comes from Today's Parent, the magazine. That's the name of it. So you could do two things with Today's Parent. Since you typed it, you could italicize it, or you could have just written it out and underlined it. And you could do the same if you're typing it, but obviously if you're handwriting it, you can't use italics. So if you were handwriting it, you'd say Today's Parent, and you'd have to underline, since that's the bigger piece of work is underlined. So both options are fine. You can either italicize or you can underline. Okay, here's a second rule for the use of quotation marks. Quotation marks are used to enclose a direct quotation. That means the words of the speaker are directly quoted exactly as they are spoken. You can't change them once it's in quotes. And again, as I said, there are some rules. If you're adding in another word, there are some things you can do. So if it's a quote and you're adding in another word, you could add, say, the word to in square brackets, and that means it's not part of the original quote. But let's look at some examples before we jump ahead any further. In dialogue, so when people are speaking, the first word of the quotation is always capitalized. So as soon as you put the quotation mark, the first letter of the first word must be capitalized, and then you set off the speaker's words from the rest of the sentence by using a comma. Example, and that will clarify it. The first one, John said, "You are late again." So John said are your introductory words. You have to put a comma before the quote. So it's John said, comma, then you open your quotation marks, and then you have to start with a capital. It's the beginning. You are late again, period, and then you close the quote. Period, and close the quote. Second example, I yelled, "Get in here this second." I yelled, comma. You have to put the comma before you open the quotes. There's your opening of the quote. there's your capital. Get in here this second. You're yelling, so you're using emphasis, so you're going to use an exclamation mark, and then you close the quote. So, moving on. When the end of the quotation is also the end of the sentence, the commas and the periods have to fall inside the quotation marks. Let me show you an example to make it clear. Molly stated, the party is this afternoon. So there's your introductory words. Molly stated. You're about to start your quote, so you put your comma, your quotation. Like at the beginning of any sentence, you have to have a capital. The party is this afternoon. That's the end of the quote, so you put the period and you end with the quotation marks. In other words, the punctuation goes inside. Just remember that you always end with the quotation mark. There are a few exceptions, as everything else, to the rule in English, but normally all the punctuation will go inside. But I will show you a couple of changes in rules. This one, on the way to the store, I said, we need bread too. So on the way to the store, I said, comma, you open the quotes, then you start with a capital, we need bread too, period, and again, you end with the quotation mark. Quotation marks are on the outside, normally. So question marks and exclamation marks can go sometimes either inside or outside the quotation marks, depending on the sentence. So I'm going to show you some examples when you do, and there are not that many examples, but you do put the punctuation outside the quotation marks. So a couple of them with the quotations inside before I show you on the outside. The first one, my teacher asked the class, how many of you are prepared for the test today? So the teacher's doing the speaking, the quotes go around the exact words that the teacher is saying. So, my teacher asked the class, comma, you open the quotes, you start with a capital. How many of you are prepared for the test today? It's a question, you put the question mark, and then you end with the quotation mark. Second example, father yelled loudly, close the door right now. So father's yelling, his exact words are close the door right now. So before you start the quote, you have to have a comma. It's a grammatical error if you don't. Then you open the quote, then you start with a capital because it's the start of what he's commanding. Close the door right now. I used an exclamation because he could be angry. It's drafty, it's cold, he's told you to close it, so you put the exclamation mark, and again, you end with the quotation mark. But now let's look at these examples where the odd few times you would put only if it's a question or an exclamation point will go on the outside. Take a look at these two examples. The first one, Benny asked, are you coming with me to the meeting? Or the second example is, was it Snoopy who asked, do you like dogs? In one of these examples, the question mark goes on the inside, and the other, it goes on the outside. So let me explain why. In the first one, these are Benny's exact words. So Benny asked, comma, you open the quote, you start with the capital, are you coming with me to the meeting? Question mark, those are his exact words, so it's the question mark, goes on the inside, and you end with the quotation mark. But take a look at the second example. Was it Snoopy who asked, do you like dogs? Now in this one, the question mark goes on the outside. Let me explain why. So to review, in this first example, Benny's spoken words make up a separate question. That's exactly what he's asking. It's a separate question. Are you coming with me to the meeting? So the question mark would go inside because it's a separate question. But if you look at this second example, was it Snoopy who asked? Let's highlight it to make it clear. Was it Snoopy who asked, do you like dogs? And the question mark goes on the outside. Reason why is in this second example, the spoken words of Snoopy, they're part of the question. They're not just his exact words, they're part of the question. So the question mark is placed on the outside of the quotation. Was it Snoopy who asked? So you're not saying, did Snoopy ask? And then give the question. It's like part of a question. So you're saying, was it Snoopy who asked? And then you say, do you like dogs? And so it's not his direct quote. He's not directly saying it, but you're asking if that's what he did say. So the question mark goes on the outside. And another example. Let's look at 1 and 2. Get away from here, yelled Jimmy. Or, Jimmy, stop yelling, get away from here. Right? So in the first one, Jimmy's spoken words make up a completely separate command. What he's saying is get away from here. It's just a separate command. So it's the quotation, the capital, the exclamation point, and then the quotation marks go on the outside with the punctuation on the inside. So the exclamation mark is on the inside in this one, and then you end with your quotation. But look at the second example. Jimmy, stop yelling, and then this is what he's yelling. Get away from here. You see here, the exclamation mark goes outside, because in the second example, Jimmy's spoken words are part of the command. They're just a part of the command. It's not just the complete quote, it's a part of the command. It's a little bit tricky. You won't run into these rules as frequently as the other rule where you don't have to worry. This one where it goes in the inside is a lot more common. It's just a direct quote, and then you put the punctuation in the inside. If you feel you need any further help, I'm glad to provide you with a few more examples of when you would use the punctuation outside the quote. Try the practice questions and answers as well that come with this video, and you'll find that helpful as well. Here's the third rule. What happens if you have a divided quote? So it's not all one. It's you say a few words, then there's a break, and then there's more direct quoting. In that case, and I'll give you an example to clarify, both parts of a divided quote have to be enclosed in quotation marks. The second part of the quote is not capitalized unless it is a new sentence. A capital letter is used to begin a quotation, and then a comma is used to set off a quoted part from the rest of the sentence. And keep in mind this rule. Now, I'm going to give you, I know it's a little bit confusing if you're just reading the rules, but not to worry, because I have 4 examples right here that we're going to work through together. So first I've explained the rule just in using language and terminology, and sometimes when you look at an example, you realize, you understand, you remember more. And one other thing I wanted to add, that when you're reading a novel or a short story, you know that there's a new speaker because a new paragraph and new quotation marks are always started. So anytime you're reading a novel and somebody new is speaking, you will see the author will begin with a new paragraph, and that shows a change in speaker. So let's look at examples now. The first one. You know I love apple pie with ice cream, she said. Let's get it for dessert. So that's called a divided quote, because there's 2 parts to it. The first is, you know I love apple pie with ice cream. The next is, let's get it for dessert. So how do you tackle this? Where do you put quotation marks? Well, you start with the quote, you put a capital, you know that I love apple pie with ice cream. She stopped talking now because it says she said, so comma, close the quote, she said. Now she's starting a new idea. So she's still speaking, so you're not going to start another sentence or another line because it's a continuation. It's called a divided quote. But it's a new sentence, so you have to start with a capital. You put the period, you put the quote, you start with a capital, let's get it for dessert, your period, and then you close, you end with the quotation mark. Another example to make it clear. I'll just delete that so it's not in the way. You are most welcome, he replied. It was a lot of fun. So he's still speaking, so it's all on the same line. You wouldn't start a new sentence like on a different line. It would all be like this on one line. But he's saying 2 things. You are welcome, he replied. It was a lot of fun. It's a continuation of what he's saying. So the quote, the capital, the comma, you close the quote, he replied. But it would have to be capitalized because it's a new sentence. So you open the quote, capital, it was a lot of fun, period, and again, with all of them, you're ending with the quote. They're the exact words of the speaker. And 2 final examples, and then we'll stop this video and continue with part 2 so that you can digest this, you can review it, and then you could read the rest of the rules. So let's look at the second set of sentences. Are you sure, I asked the bus driver, that this is the correct stop? So again, it's a divided quote. You're asking the bus driver, and you're saying, are you sure that this is the correct stop? Are you sure that this is the correct stop. That's all that you're saying. But it's a break in the thought, so look how you have to punctuate it. You start with a quotation, a capital, are you sure? You close the comma, you close the quote, I asked the bus driver. Now you're continuing to speak, so you have to put the comma, and you have to start with the new quote, but you're not putting a capital because you're continuing, because the sentence is, are you sure that this is the correct stop? In fact, if you put a capital there, it would be grammatically incorrect, because that is not a sentence. It's a continuation of what you're asking. And then you have your question mark, and then you're ending, because it's a direct words, with the quotation marks. The punctuation goes in the inside. And the last example, it is the final period of the game, he said, and we are down by 2 goals. So he's saying all this. It's the final period of the game, and we're down by 2 goals. So he's breaking it off by saying he said. There's a break in the quotation. So again, you begin with the quotation marks. You always start with a capital at the beginning of every sentence. You always have a capital. It is the final period of the game. Now, because he said is there, you have to close the quote. So comma, you close the quote. You always have to put another comma to reopen the quote. So you close with a comma, you reopen. You put the quotation marks, but he's continuing to speak, so you must not put a capital. And we are down by 2 goals. Your period goes inside again, because the punctuation almost always goes inside, and then you end with the quotation marks. So let's stop there, and feel free to review all these rules. You can listen to the video again, and maybe you can stop it if you have some questions. You can review what I say, and you could follow along, because there are a lot of rules on quotation marks, particularly the divided quotes. When do you put a period? When don't you? How do you use punctuation appropriately for quotation marks? And try the practice questions and answers, and hopefully that will be of assistance to you. And if you have any further questions, please contact me within the website, and I'm glad to help you or even provide you with more questions and answers. Thank you so much, and stay tuned, and please listen to part 2, because there are still quite a few more rules on quotation marks. This is really only half of them. Okay? Thank you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.